Hey Rayleigh, and anybody else watching, and welcome back to another message from your father. We are finishing out Judges today, which means we are in chapter 20 and 21. If you remember, we've been looking at some dark stuff with Judges. Specifically, last time we looked at the Danites settling in Laish and all the kind of crazy stuff surrounding that. And then that, again, really, really dark story of the young man and his concubine. So today we're going to see some of the outcropping of that. Remember, that was a really big deal. They said we haven't seen anything like this. No one has seen anything like this for years. And this is incredibly evil, what's been done. So today, the outcropping of that is war and a lot of death. So as you remember, as we've kept saying, there's no king in Israel at this time. Everyone did as he saw fit. So we'll see the ramifications. That is Israel against the Benjamites. Sorry, I can't talk today. Against the Benjamites. And we'll see some incredible numbers. These are massive armies. And then finally, we'll wrap up Judges talking about wives for the Benjamites. So again, all of this just in those last two chapters, 20 and 21. So chapter 20. Then all the Israelites from Dan to Beersheba and from the land of Gilead came out as one man and assembled before the Lord at Mizpah. The leaders of all the people of the tribes of Israel took their place in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 soldiers armed with swords. The Benjamites heard that the Israelites had gone up to Mizpah. Then the Israelites said, "Tell us how this awful thing happened." So the Levite, the husband of the murdered woman, said, "I and my concubine came to Gibeah in Benjamin to spend the night. During the night, the men of Gibeah came after me and surrounded the house, intending to kill me. They raped my concubine, and she died. I took my concubine, cut her into pieces, and sent one piece to each region of Israel's inheritance, because they committed this lewd and disgraceful act in Israel. Now, all you Israelites, speak up and give your verdict." All the people rose as one man, saying, "None of us will go home. Not one of us will return to his house. But now, this is what we'll do to Gibeah. We'll go up against it, as the lot directs. We'll take 10 men out of every 100 from all the tribes of Israel, and 100 from 1,000, and from 1,000, 10,000, to get provisions for the army. Then, when the army arrives at Gibeah in Benjamin, it can give them what they deserve for all this vileness done in Israel." So all the men of Israel got together and united as one man against the city. The tribes of Israel sent men throughout the tribe of Benjamin, saying, "What about this awful crime that it was committed among you? Now surrender those wicked men of Gibeah, so that we may put them to death and purge the evil from Israel." But the Benjamites would not listen to their fellow Israelites. From their towns they came together at Gibeah to fight against the Israelites. At once, the Benjamites mobilized 26,000 swordsmen from their towns, in addition to 700 chosen men from those living in Gibeah. Among all those soldiers, there were 700 chosen men who were left-handed, each of whom could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. Israel, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 swordsmen, all of them fighting men. The Israelites went up to Bethel and inquired of God. They said, "Who of us shall go first to fight against the Benjamites?" The Lord replied, "Judah shall go up first." The next morning the Israelites got up and pitched camp near Gibeah. The men of Israel went out to fight the Benjamites and took up battle positions against them at Gibeah. The Benjamites, came out of Gibeah and cut down 22,000 Israelites on the battlefield that day. But the men of Israel encouraged one another, and again took up their positions where they had stationed themselves the first day. The Israelites went up and wept before the Lord until evening, and they inquired of the Lord. They said, "Shall we go up again to battle against the Benjamites, our brothers?" The Lord answered, "Go up against them." Then the Israelites drew near to Benjamin the second day. This time, when the Benjamites came out from Gibeah to oppose them, they cut down another 18,000 Israelites, all of them armed with swords. Then the Israelites, all the people, went up to Bethel, and there they sat weeping before the Lord. They fasted that day until evening and presented burnt offerings and fellowship offerings to the Lord. And the Israelites inquired of the Lord. In those days, the Ark of the Covenant of God was there. with Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, ministering before it. They asked, "Shall we go up again to battle Benjamin, our brother, or not?" The Lord responded, "Go, for tomorrow I will give them into your hands." Then Israel set an ambush around Gibeah. They went up against the Benjamites on the third day and took up positions against Gibeah as they had done before. The Benjamites came out to meet them and were drawn away from the city. They began to inflict casualties on the Israelites as before, so that about 30 men fell in the open field and on the roads, the one leading to Bethel and the other to Gibeah. While the Benjamites were saying, "We are defeating them as before," the Israelites were saying, "Let's retreat and draw them away from the city to the roads." All the men of Israel moved from their places and took up positions at Baal Tamar, and the Israelite ambush charged out of its place on the west of Gibeah. Then 10,000 of Israel's finest men made a frontal attack on Gibeah. The fighting was so heavy that the Benjamites did not realize how near disaster was. The Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel. On that day, the Israelites struck down 25,100 Benjamites, all armed with swords. Then the Benjamites saw that they were beaten. Now the men of Israel had given way before Benjamin because they relied on the ambush they had set near Gibeah. The men who had been in ambush made a sudden dash into Gibeah, spread out, and put the whole city to the sword. The men of Israel had arranged with the ambush that they should send up a great cloud of smoke from the city, and then the men of Israel would turn in the battle. The Benjamites had begun to inflict casualties on the men of Israel, about 30, and they said, "We are defeating them as in the first battle." But when the column of smoke began to rise from the city, the Benjamites turned and saw the smoke of the whole city going up into the sky. Then the men of Israel turned on the men of Benjamin. Israel turned on them, and the men of Benjamin were terrified because they realized that disaster had come upon them. So they fled before the Israelites in the direction of the desert, but they could not escape the battle, and the men of Israel who came out of the towns cut them down there. They surrounded the Benjamites, chased them, and easily overran them in the vicinity of Gibeah on the east. 18,000 Benjamites fell, all of them valiant fighters. As they turned and fled towards the desert to the rock of Rimmon, the Israelites cut down 5,000 men along the roads. They kept pressing after the Benjamites as far as Gidom and struck down 2,000 more. On that day, 25,000 Benjamite swordsmen fell, all of them valiant fighters, but 600 men turned and fled into the desert to the rock of Rimmon, where they stayed 4 months. The men of Israel went back to Benjamin and put all the towns to the sword, including the animals and everything else they found. All the towns they came across, they set on fire. Chapter 21. The men of Israel had taken an oath at Mizpah, "Not one of us will give his daughter in marriage to a Benjamite." The people went to Bethel, where they sat before God until evening, raising their voices and weeping bitterly. "O Lord, the God of Israel," they cried, "why has this thing happened to Israel? Why should one tribe be missing from Israel today?" Early the next day, the people built an altar and presented burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then the Israelites asked, "Who from all the tribes of Israel has failed to assemble before the Lord?" For they had taken a solemn oath that anyone who failed to assemble before the Lord at Mizpah should certainly be put to death. Now, the Israelites grieved for their brothers, the Benjamites. "Today one is cut off from Israel," they said. "How can we provide wives for those who are left, since we have taken an oath by the Lord not to give them any of our daughters in marriage?" Then they asked, which one of the tribes of Israel failed to assemble before the Lord at Mizpah. They discovered that no one from Jabesh Gilead had come to the camp for the assembly. For when they counted the people, they found that none of the people of Jabesh Gilead were there. So the assembly sent 12,000 fighting men with instructions to go to Jabesh Gilead, to put to the sword those living there, including the women and the children. "This is what you are to do," they said. "Kill every male and every woman who is not a virgin." They found among the people living in Jabesh Gilead 400 young women who had never slept with a man, and they took them to the camp at Shiloh in Canaan. Then the whole assembly sent an offer of peace to the Benjamites at the rock of Rimmon. So the Benjamites returned at that time and were given the women of Jabesh Gilead who had been spared, but there were not enough for all of them. The people grieved for Benjamin because the Lord had made a gap in the tribes of Israel, and the elders of the assembly said, With the women of Benjamin destroyed, how shall we provide wives for the men who are left? The Benjamite survivors must have heirs. They said, so a tribe of Israel will not be wiped out. We can't give them our daughters as wives, since the Israelites have taken this oath. Cursed be anyone who gives a wife to a Benjamite. But look, there is an annual festival of the Lord in Shiloh, to the north of Bethel, and east of the road that goes from Bethel to Shechem, and to the south of Lebonah. So they instructed the Benjamites, saying, Go and hide in the vineyards and watch. When the girls of Shiloh come out to join in the dancing and rush from the vineyards, and each of you seize a wife from the girls of Shiloh and go to the land of Benjamin. When their fathers or brothers complain to us, we will say to them, Do us a kindness by helping them, because we did not get wives for them during the war, and you are innocent, since you did not give your daughters to them. So that is what the Benjamites did. While the girls were dancing, each man caught one and carried her off to be his wife. Then they returned to their influence and rebuilt the towns and settled in them. At that time, the Israelites left that place and went home to their own tribes and clans, each to his own inheritance. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. So I've heard a lot of people mention that, oh, hey, God allows this stuff to happen, so God's okay with it. He allows it to happen, so that's his acceptance and that's his endorsement of it. And I think that's a really, really dangerous place to be. I mean, and in fact, to assume that. In fact, even looking again at those numbers, if everyone's doing as they saw fit, God warned about what would happen if you worshiped other gods, if you went your own way, if you didn't fear God. So what happened? Well, God judges the Israelites and the Benjamites and uses them against each other. I mean, that's what it looks like in here, right? So Israel had 400,000 men, and the Benjamites had 26,700, kind of depending on how you read that. So Israel, again, that's that army of 400,000 versus 26,700. But that's a little off, right? Because it doesn't say that all of Israel fought them all at once. They chose a lot, and the lot, I think, was Judah. I think that's right. Were chosen to fight them first. And in that battle, that was 22,000 fell. And then later, 18,000 fell. So we see this massive judgment. And then once the Benjamites are defeated, that's at least 25,000. All of these men doing as they saw fit. And yeah, we see once where they inquire of the Lord, and that looks really good. But we have these reminders strung throughout all of Judges, just saying, hey, this is a lawless time, a by and large lawless time. And we see these judgments happening left and right. And that's exactly what God predicted. So my prayer for you, really, is that you would take the time, slow down, and fear God, and recognize that it's easy to get caught up and want to go your own way in the day-to-day. I mean, that's an everyday struggle, but it's so, so important to pause and truly listen to God and recognize who is in control right now. Am I going my own way, or am I allowing God to lead my way? And that's a difficult question to ask in truth, and in truth looking for that answer. You know, I struggle with that daily, and sometimes I don't ask as well, but that is incredibly important. Anyway, know that I love you so, so much. For anyone else joining, I appreciate you as well, and we'll plan on seeing you tomorrow. Have a good one.